Welcome, everyone. So glad you're able to join us this morning for HDL's latest California Sales Tax Trends and Forecast webinar. All right, so let's get going here. By way of quick introduction, I'm Bobby Young, Client Services Director here for HDL California Sales Tax, and I'm joined today by fellow principals Ken Brown and Tracy Fesley. We're all on the team that analyzes quarterly sales tax data and then meets with clients here in California to go through the results and also present forecast, which right now during this time period is so tangible for all of us as you put together your last budgets and get ready for formal adoption for your councils and boards. A little bit about HDL. We've been in business for over 40 years. So thankful to be able to serve over 700 clients nationwide, as we do from coast to coast. And also we are so blessed to have over a 99% client retention rate. So thankful that you as our clients value the service that we provide, and we're so thankful to provide it to you. All right, right up front, let's go ahead and jump in. Fourth quarter results today. Fourth quarter, as a reminder, fourth quarter calendar year 2023, October, November, December time period. As we all know, it's the holiday shopping period. It is the most heavily revenue generated period of the entire calendar year. And kind of as you see on the screen, not going to beat around the bush here, down 2.5% statewide. I'd be remiss if I didn't express kind of the whole team's emotions as we saw the results. We were definitely bummed out. We thought even up through last quarter, we might stretch just a little, scrape a little bit more out of this fourth quarter calendar year. We were expecting a result of down about 1%. So what we saw was almost double that. And Tracy and Ken are on board to really talk through some of the, all of the different changes. As you see here, I've kind of highlighted two big categories: autos, transportation, which Ken's going to talk about here in just a little bit, then also general consumer goods. Tracy's on deck right after Ken. But these two categories really didn't meet overall our forecast expectations, and we think that that's mainly the reason why. A lot of you can surmise, and we'll talk about them coming up, as to the bigger economics and what's affecting consumers going through this fourth quarter. But even as you go down the entire list, you'll see every category except for the countywide use tax pools was down this quarter. So not the greatest results overall. And when you look on the right side of the screen, you'll see it didn't matter which region we were in within California. It was everybody kind of got hit with some negatives there. It's a continuing trend, and I think some of the bigger takeaways you'll see throughout this entire calendar year 2023, we've seen these negative results, and it just continued here for the fourth quarter. As we sat around the table, like we do every quarter, every time we get new data, we kind of come up with some bigger ideas and bullet points. You'll see right at the very top here some of those hindrances on our economy that have been so prevalent throughout the year: interest rates, consumer spending, savings trends, which I've got some graphs to show you. On some of the positive side, we still believe that there's some tourism, business travel yet to come. I think that kind of leans into 2024. AB 1228, which you'll hear Tracy talk about when we look into restaurants. Man, it is just right there. Could it be positive? Could it be negative? As we're hearing about most recently, as it went into effect, we've got a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings about what could be the results because of AB 1228. And then gas prices are always there for us as consumers. If it's going up, it's not always a good thing. If it's going down, it's not necessarily a good thing for sales tax from gas stations, but might be for other things. Interest rates, the feds and what they're going to do coming up. You see on the screen, obviously, we've gone through 2 calendar years of interest rate increases over 11 times, 525 basis points. We're holding steady there. I think we're all just in anticipation and waiting for when the feds might do something as far as reducing interest rates, thereby probably, hopefully, crossing our fingers, spurring on some consumer confidence and a little bit more spending over what we just experienced in 2023. This is probably going to be the story out of 2024 as we work through the calendar year, just because of what it might mean. Holding on too long to the current interest rate level likely pulls back consumers more. Pulling it down allowing for some access to maybe available home equity for homeowners, or just softening up the overall cost on long-term financing. I think this is our major consideration as we look to the forecast coming up. I think as we've talked about over the last few webinars and seen results, we've probably achieved the soft landing that the Feds have wanted. When are they going to start to reduce rates is kind of next on our hit list. Some data points and things that we're watching just as far as consideration. You'll see here goods and services. And as consumers, you'll see the blue line is core goods, thereby think taxable sales like we're so into right now. And then the orange line, core services, think non-taxable. And you can see how dynamically different we are from calendar year 22 and why the entire calendar year 23 has really kind of come down comparatively speaking. What's to come? We're watching this pretty closely. Probably means as we look into 2024, yeah, it's going to be soft for a little while, especially right here at the front end of the calendar year. Overall consumer spending on discretionary, non-discretionary items. The orange line here is discretionary. Non-discretionary, really household demand goods versus discretionary. So we're looking in this period here to the right on this graph. You can see how we've come back together pretty close and just hovering above the 0% line. Whereas we look back at historical periods, you can see very similar. We saw a slowdown go back to 2014, I'm sorry, here, and then the lead up to right before the pandemic in 2029, when we felt like, yeah, the economy is probably going to be slowing down. We saw them come back together. So we're back here now. Definitely represents the slowing that we've seen. If we use this graph and go back pre-Great Recession, I don't think we're there quite yet. We're expecting to see discretionary drop off so much, but right before we were still seeing a slowing there in 2007, 2008. So it's again just some markers for us to keep watch on and take note of. Whoops, sorry about that. So as we think about consumer spending, again, here for, the fourth quarter represents the end of the calendar year. So we start updating and looking at, this is a chart we've been trending for quite some time. It is online versus brick and mortar allocations of who's generating revenue, where is it coming from. You can see most notably the pandemic period here and the drop off out of general consumer goods most certainly has rebounded the last 2-3 calendar years, which is great. What you see also is online, and Tracy will kind of talk about this during some of her presentation later, but for the last 2 calendar years now, sales tax generated from online relatively flat. And that's really consumers kind of maxing out, buying pretty much the same as they may have in the prior year, or the relative balance between purchasing and cost of goods. So we've seen the gap return, but even general consumer goods this last calendar year, just off from where we were 2022. Consumer credit, you can see here on the left side of the screen, consumer credit continues, overall revolving consumer credit continues to increase. We're watching this, taking note, not always necessarily a bad thing, not a long-term strategy for us as consumers to keep buying on credit. And then the delinquency of loans you see here to the right, and starting to inch up, especially the depths of when everybody was able to pay off a lot of their loans and credit during post-pandemic, COVID pandemic. Savings and disposable income, again, just another metrics, another data point that we're looking at. Just it's been fairly steady, right around the 4 to 5% throughout the calendar year, down a little closer to 4% now out of Q4. Most certainly not where we were post-pandemic, but that was also kind of a bit of an anomaly of sorts. Unemployment, and you'll see here, still below the 5% mark. I think now for November of 23, which is still, I think, the most recent data that we were able to find, right at the 5% unemployment mark statewide. We haven't yet been able to update our statewide. You can see this is exactly where it was last quarter. A little bit more unemployment in the Central Valley versus coastal and northern Southern California. most certainly we're watching this one as we talk about AB 1228 and kind of what might that, have, what impact that may have inevitably on unemployment as businesses reconsider how they're going to be providing services. So we're going to keep a close watch on overall unemployment. Again, end of the calendar year here, you can see statewide we were down 2.3% overall, and just by county distribution, a lot of orange and dark orange signifying bigger decreases overall, with only a couple of counties and for very specific reasons. I think energy projects out in the Imperial County area. I think we had more fulfillment center openings in Ventura County and up along the coast. So definitely some specific reasons, but overall, nobody's been immune to the overall flattening and slight decreases from sales tax throughout the entire calendar year. So where we land, you heard me mention for the last 4 quarters now, we've seen decreases throughout the entire calendar year. How that compares, we weren't going to be able to continue seeing the double-digit gains year over year like we had previously, so we knew the slowdown was coming. 4 quarters wrapping up. You can see here these periods, 3Q through 2Q, represent the current fiscal year, 22-23, getting off to a slow start overall. Now, thought there was one more there. You can see our forecast for 1Q. We expect that to continue into first quarter being down about 0.7%. Hopefully then, as we turn into the summer months, kind of the time period we're in, start of April now, expect to maybe see a little bit more growth out of sales tax, but it's pretty much going to buoy us only for a little while. Then, obviously, looking out a little bit farther, you can see more expected growth. Think interest rates and consumer confidence starting to change or kind of switch over a little bit there. So that's where we are right now. I'm going to turn it over to Ken Brown to talk about autos.
All right. Thank you so much, Bobby. So a big reason why sales tax was down this quarter a little bit more than we expected was the auto transportation group. As Bobby noted earlier, I think we were down just a little bit over 6% for this category. And that was a dip below the recent trend where we've been basically looking at 2 to 3% quarterly drops, and then all of a sudden the 6% dip. So as a result, I'm going to spend a little bit more time in this presentation on the auto transportation category than some of the others I have to cover today. But the first thing I want to do to orient ourselves in this examination of what's going on with the auto transportation group is take a look at this chart, which is showing year over year quarterly sales growth. And if anything, this graph does absolutely nothing to illuminate the mystery of why tax receipts were down this quarter. It, in fact, deepens the mystery because, as you can see here, we're actually up about 10% over on the right side of the graph there on a year-over-year basis in terms of new car sales. So that would lead you to think that we would actually be positive in terms of sales tax receipts this quarter, but that is just not the case. And so I think a big part of the story here is basically inventory, and we're starting to normalize a little bit in the auto market. So we're still not back to where we were before the pandemic. We're still a little bit under that level. The latest stat that I saw is that we're probably somewhere around March of 2021 in terms of our inventory levels, but it is a lot better than where we were up to that or following that point. And I think the key to this graph is to know that there's some very significant variations in terms of brand, in terms of availability and inventory. And so you see over here on the left side, you see Toyota, Honda, Lexus, Mazda. These are some of the Japanese automakers that are just famous for their just-in-time manufacturing processes. And they've historically been leaner than the American brands in terms of parts and inventory management. So even though their car inventory levels are starting to normalize like all others, their vehicles are in high demand and there's just less available to buy. But over here on the right side, on the other hand, you see brands like Lincoln, Chrysler, Dodge. They have actually inventory levels now at least twice the industry average. So pretty big disparity there. My colleague passed on this a YouTube video to me that I summarized here with this chart, which I thought was really interesting. It's kind of like the preceding graph, but it's looking at actual vehicle models, not just brands. And so this is showing days of available market supply by each of these models. And you see some of the same names here as we saw on the preceding slide. You see the Dodge, you see Chrysler, Ram. But you also see quite a few electric vehicles sprinkled in here. We've heard in the news about some consumers growing reluctance to buy electric vehicles right now. So they're getting a little skittish on that part of the market. But basically, this is if you're looking for a new car, this might be if you're looking for that best possible deal, there might be some opportunities here. The Dodge Hornet up top, 480 days of inventory available based on current selling pace. So somebody help me with the math there. It just hardly seems possible, but I think that's close to a year and a third of available market. So if you're looking for a deal, that might be the one to look at. Now, in terms of what we're getting out of the news media in terms of pricing changes, this is a big part of the story. So vehicle inventory normalizing, power is returning to buyers in the market. And as a result, some of those crazy, insane pricing that we saw during the pandemic is now kind of reverting a little bit back to a more normal level to some degree. And so here you see KBB.com data. And this is basically pricing data on a year-over-year basis. Non-luxury vehicles, pretty flat, down 2%. But luxury vehicle prices, electric vehicle prices, each down about double digit. And even more impactful for us, in this KBB.com article, they talked about pricing for the Model Y by Tesla, cited as being down a whopping 21% on a year-over-year basis. And that means a lot for us here in California because the New Car Dealers Association here in California reports that is the #1 selling vehicle here in the state, followed by the Tesla Model 3. So it's the top 1 and 2 positions. And then number 3 and number 4 would be your Toyota RAV4 and the Camry. So that drop in electric vehicle pricing certainly impactful to us here in California. Now, I sampled in our state sales tax database a whole bunch of dealerships throughout the state of California, and I broke them up by American brands, luxury brands, and Asian brands. And so how did these price declines and inventory changes result in impacts on our state sales tax data that you're seeing in terms of your revenues? Well, as you can see, the luxury brands were the big loser this quarter. Of the brands that I sampled throughout the state, I saw an average decrease of about 17% in tax receipts for those luxury brands. The one silver lining here is this is the 4th consecutive quarter of year-over-year significant declines in the luxury market sector. So I believe, if anything, we are closer to the end than the beginning of the declines in that particular group. What worries me a little bit more right now is the American brands down only 1%. But there was a sharp deceleration in returns for the sector compared to the previous periods. Previous periods were sort of holding up the overall totals as the luxury brands fell. Asian brands pretty flat and steady. Pricing on these models holding up better due to relatively low inventory levels. I think one of the things that's happening right now, one of the big trends, American brands known for the big, expensive trucks, full-size trucks. And just reading today a great article on Bloomberg.com saying that the folks are economizing. They're starting to shift back more to the Camrys, the Corollas. They're not spending as much for the fully loaded vehicles nor for the big SUVs. They're more going subcompact. So I think that's playing out in the data here. Finally, another factor that's resulting in some pressures in the auto transportation market is availability of credit. And this graph here from Bloomberg notes that availability of credit for auto purchases is now at the lowest level as it has been since 2020. And they accompanied this graph with a pretty interesting article about a gentleman who was denied a new car loan, and he had a credit score of about 800. And while he was ultimately able to find another lender willing to give him the money for this purchase, the anecdotal story in that article shows that it's getting tough out there. And that's on top of financing rates north of 7% now to buy a vehicle. So putting it all together in terms of the auto transportation market or auto transportation sector, the three green boxes up here with the green lines around them are the positive factors, including essentially increasing inventory on dealership lots, is that we're transitioning to a more balanced market. Some are even saying maybe even a buyer's market. We have a pretty decent economy with some wage growth happening that will support spending. And also, there's a lot of pent-up demand out there for new vehicles. The latest data point is almost a year old. We'll get a new one in 2 months about the average age of the fleet in the United States of vehicles on the road. It's at a record 12 and a half years, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that go higher in 2 months when we get the updated data point. So there is a lot of pent-up demand out there, but holding that back a little bit is even with some recent price dips, we're still 29% higher for pricing on new vehicles compared to before the pandemic. So super high prices. And even though there's more to be found, there's also difficulty now in getting some loans even. And those that bought a car recently, they're probably underwater, particularly if you bought a used car. Pricing's coming down. That coupled with just general inflation is causing a lot of consumer stress, and delinquency rates on auto loans are actually increasing. So for what we expect in terms of the forecast going forward, we're looking for another 2 quarters of declines and then modest increases beginning again in the second half of the year. The key here is credit conditions starting to loosen. So that's what we're looking for to help the auto market somewhere in the second half of this year to see some modest growth again. All right, so looking at gasoline, so I'm going to have a graph up here in just a minute on the screen that is going to show you the price of gasoline right now in this box here compared to a year ago. And we've had a wild ride in gasoline prices, and that's resulted in a lot of spikes and dips and valleys in terms of our tax receipts. But the good news here is we're stabilizing a little bit. You can see that we're actually pretty in line with where we were now compared to last year, maybe just a little bit higher. And yes, there's a whole bunch of political risk out there. We've been through a lot and it's still facing us. But an interesting point I just wanted to spend a minute on is that the United States really has hit all-time highs in recent months in terms of domestic crude production. More oil has been produced by the United States in just the last few months than any other nation in the history of the world. And you see that here in this red line here, the number one producer. And it's really especially incredible given that just 15 years ago, you see that dip here, we were at the lowest level since the 1940s. And even more amazing when you read that, as I did today, a stat saying that we actually have 25% fewer rigs that are active than what we had 15 months ago. So all of this growth is really due to technology. It's due to shale and other extraction technologies. And so the United States, as a leading petroleum producer now, will be a force for stabilizing prices going forward in the market. Sure, there's going to be some political risks, some political instability, but that is going to be a force long-term for stability. And as a result of that, we are projecting relatively flat pricing for fuel and service station revenue going forward, as you can see here on this graph. Building and construction, we were spot on this quarter on our building and construction forecast. We're continuing to monitor several factors that influence revenues for the sector. Most notably, of course, the jump in interest rates over the last year or so that's really frozen the housing market. But we do expect rates to begin to moderate a little bit in the second half of this 2024 calendar year. But there's a couple other factors that we're monitoring closely. One, certainly construction input pricing. This is lumber prices, and it can certainly be very impactful in terms of the amount of tax revenue that you're seeing from your businesses in your city or county. And so lumber prices have been all over the place over the last couple of years. But the key thing, as you can see on this graph, is that they're starting to rise a little bit again here over on the right side compared to where they were. And so that's an increase again after these really sharp upswings that we saw right coming out of the pandemic. But the bottom line here is that we're no longer seeing declines, and we're actually seeing modest increases that should support higher tax revenues going forward from your lumber sellers. And the same for concrete. Concrete pricing, also an important construction input. We've seen slow and moderate growth for this concrete pricing throughout all of calendar year 2023 and extending now into 2024. We're about almost 9% higher in terms of pricing than where we were a year ago. So inputs and construction pricing should be helpful. Another major issue, weather. And so weather last year was certainly a huge issue, disrupted a lot of tax revenue from the building and construction suppliers, contractors, and the like. So where are we faring with that this year? It seems to me like we've had a lot of rain, but the data I could find, this is like 8 stations up in the Northern Sierra, and over here, I think it's 5 stations in the Tulare region. And you can see the red line, and that's basically where we are so far in this season. And we're pretty close to the median. That's the darker gray here. But we're still, most importantly, well below this yellow line that's last year. And so that indicates to me that the weather is just not going to be the same factor it was in the results in the first quarter of this year when we get the data in a couple months as it was last year. So all in, we're projecting a couple more quarters of relatively weak tax revenue, but then a return to more normal growth in the second half of this year for the building and construction sector, and then extending into 2025 and beyond. Again, just like autos, a huge amount of pent-up demand for housing in this state and throughout the country. Finally, the food and drug category. Food and drug category, it's small, but it was down quite a bit this quarter, down more than expected, down 6%. A contributor to that decline was cannabis. We've now seen, as you can see on this graph, 8 consecutive quarterly declines for the cannabis sector due to likely predominantly stiff competition from the illegal market. But that's not the only factor. We also saw dips in grocery stores, convenience stores, and liquors sales. A lot of that could be due to a small amount of gasoline that's actually mixed into these groups. We do have some small fueling stations mixed in. There's some like Ralph's and some other grocery store chains have a lot of fueling stations in the grocery store category. So a little bit of that is due to this, given that fuel prices were down this quarter. But I think another factor is that folks are buying more alcohol in restaurants now and less from the grocery store. We also have issues with saturation in the drugstore market. We see the news recently about Rite Aid across the state closing stores. And this is certainly exacerbated by online competition from internet retailers. So overall, we expect this category to dip slightly for the next couple quarters, but then return to moderate growth of about 2% in 1Q25. So let me turn the presentation now over to my colleague, Tracy, to discuss general consumer goods. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Ken. I am going to start with general consumer goods, obviously. As you know, the fourth quarter marks the big retail shopping season. And however, compared to 2022, shoppers definitely curtailed their spending. General consumer goods contracted 3.3% in the fourth quarter compared to a year ago. We anticipated this. We projected a decline of about 1.4%. So spending shrunk more than we expected. All 4 quarters of calendar year 2023 declined compared to the highs of 2022. As you can see on this slide, all but one of the top 10 retail categories declined. The one bright spot here is department stores, likely attributed to store closures that happened in prior periods that somewhat deflated revenues, and then also more online fulfillment being handled by department stores themselves. The largest category in this group is discount department stores. They comprise 31% of the general consumer goods group, and they were down 1.4%. So they really contributed to that overall decline. Similar to what Ken just mentioned with convenience stores, discount department stores, many of them have fuel pumps associated with their retail outlets, and those revenues are all reported together. So the pricing, the fuel pricing that Ken discussed also has an impact on the overall result for discount department stores. Two other categories in this group that I just wanted to highlight: home furnishings and electronics appliance stores continue their dramatic decline. We've seen this in prior periods. Shoppers are just spending less on those big ticket items. Factoring out discount department stores entirely, the combination of other high impact retail categories have contracted 5 consecutive quarters. You see that here in the solid teal line. Budget tightening, elevated interest rates, everything that Bobby and Ken have already kind of discussed as influencing factors have reduced our demand for some of these durable goods. You can see here in the dotted lines, this is our forecast, our outlook for general consumer goods, everything except discount department stores. A little bit of contraction in the first quarter and mild growth going forward. One thing I will just mention is one of the reasons for this contraction is a big chunk of our spending as consumers is now going to non-taxable services and experiences. The outlook for general consumer goods anticipates, as I said, spending to continue slowing in the first quarter of 24. This is the quarter we just ended. We just entered second quarter, and little bit of growth here, really not seeing things pick up in this category until 24-25 fiscal year. And again, you can just see the preceding 4 quarters of decline during calendar year 23 compared to calendar year 22, a definite pullback in retail brick and mortar spending. All right, let's dive into the pools. Sorry, I always say that. I can't help it. Pools grew 0.6%, which is higher than our forecasted decline of being down 2%. So we saw growth in the pools in the fourth quarter. General consumer goods in the pools, this kind of fourth bar down in the graph, derives its revenues from online shopping. So we're really talking e-commerce here. It comprises about oh gosh, I lost my statistic, but it's a large group of the pool, and it grew 2.5% during the period. And you contrast that to the 3.3% decline we just talked about with general consumer goods. And you can just see that folks have leaned into online shopping. Couple of interesting things to note: mobile shopping eclipsed desktop shopping sales for the very first time. So we're using our phones more than we're using our laptops. And then another statistic is shoppers took advantage of the buy now, pay later options that have kind of reemerged. Remember the days of layaway? Well, now it's kind of come back again. And this could lower some sales tax revenue in future months as some of those big fourth quarter holiday shopping bills become due. Second to general consumer goods in this group is business and industry. It dipped 2.2% for the quarter. Big declines in business services, business to business, IT related spending. Also, kind of offsetting that a little bit, some big increases in energy utilities. I think Bobby referenced this a moment ago. Very regional, very volatile project-based revenues. Another key category in the pools that Ken talked about are autos and transportation. And these are down 6.2%. As he mentioned, the used car market is down. And this represents those third-party auto sales that kind of filter through the DMV, and certainly seeing a pullback in that market. One last category just to mention are restaurants and hotels. While a very small piece of the pools, these revenues have gained some traction over the last few years. They are generated by delivery services that have pretty much really emerged in full force during the pandemic period. These services are offering kind of full service delivery for restaurants. Because the delivery company does not own the food at the time the order is placed, it is considered really indirect revenue. They don't own the merchandise, and sales tax is distributed through the pools. So while this is a small portion of the pools, it's 3.5% of the statewide sales tax revenue for restaurants and hotels, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And this is revenue that has been pulled out of direct allocation and into the pools. Here we see a closer look at general consumer goods trends versus the rest of the pools. General consumer goods is this green trend line. Everything else in the pools, all the other groups, is blue. Third quarter 19 through third quarter 20, this craziness right here, Bobby talked about it. This is legislation coming into effect, generating more revenue into general consumer goods in the pools, and as well as our pandemic spending frenzy. Then allocations begin to decrease in the first quarter of 21 as companies increase the use of in-state fulfillment centers. And that changed reporting from indirect to direct to where those buildings or facilities are located. There was another shift in the fourth quarter of 22 here. Same thing, more buildings came online, more fulfillment centers, and more revenues shifting to direct allocation. So really looking at this blue line, which is all other groups except general consumer goods, the growth in the pool has really been driven by growth in all of the other groups. But now, as we're looking at fourth quarter 23, really starting in third quarter 23, we're seeing some negative growth in autos, as Ken discussed, business and industry, and that is really leveling off the kind of trajectory of these two groups on this graph. Another look, illustrating the growing utilization of in-state fulfillment centers. This slide is looking at all online sales. So the blue is indirect, these are the pools. The green is direct. These are agency allocations or fulfillment centers. You can just see we used to be kind of at this 80-20% split, 80% going into the pools, 20% going to agencies directly. And now we're migrating into more of a 60-40% split. Big change in the allocation of these revenues related to fulfillment centers. Looking at the pools, I mentioned fourth quarter 23 grew almost 1%. We thought it would be down 2%. So here is where we missed the mark to the good. And that is because we were coming off 4 consecutive quarters of decline as more fulfillment centers came online. We thought a little bit more of that would spill into fourth quarter 23. It did not. Going forward, we really assume modest growth in the pools, 1% going forward, really for the rest of this fiscal year, not really seeing 2% growth until the beginning of 24-25. Let's move into business and industry. We'll talk about a few things here. Business and industry group has seen some crazy growth. You can see it here in this graph, very similar to the graphs we just looked at, all related to fulfillment centers as those revenues really take center stage for business and industry. As a total group, B&I, as we lovingly refer to this group, ended fourth quarter 23 2.2% down. That's a bit of a shift from the 1.4% growth we were anticipating last quarter. Fulfillment centers comprise 31% of this entire group. And as you can see, they had 0 growth in fourth quarter 23. That was a bit of a surprise. I was thinking they were going to have 1 or 2% growth. They bottomed out and it was effectively even. The gray columns here in this chart are really showing the dramatic growth in fulfillment center revenues, legislative impacts, shift to direct reporting, and this trend line here for fulfillment center revenues essentially follows the general consumer goods pattern with those, big fourth quarter peaks and first quarter valleys. All right, let's pull fulfillment centers out. kind of like what we did with general consumer goods, pulling out the really big gorilla group. Some of the other 21 business types in this industry group range from heavy and light industry, farm equipment, wineries, biotechnologies, motion pictures. It's an incredibly diverse industry group. These are the top 10 performers in the group without fulfillment centers, and they comprise 51% of the total group. These 10 sectors averaged 3.5% down in fourth quarter 23. So coupled with no growth in fulfillment centers, the top 10 being down 3.5%, this is why we're seeing that decline in the business and industry overall results. The largest declines were in medical biotech. Equipment and supply needs have tapered post-pandemic. Heavy and light industry are facing all kinds of headwinds with pricing and demand challenges and even employment. And then business to business, where we see that in business services and in office equipment and IT sales have definitely slowed. We saw something similar in the brick and mortar aspect in general consumer goods as well. Looking at some of the industry trends for business and industry, again, fulfillment centers came in 0 in fourth quarter 23, expecting some mild growth going forward. The Institute for Supply Management Index, this is an index we lean into a little bit when we're looking at heavy and light industrial sectors. It's still contracting. That's not a good thing. So a lot of headwinds there, as I already mentioned. And then looking at medical biotech and agriculture, both are feeling the pinch of high interest rates and limited access to capital for investment. Still some optimistic outlook. Ag is really leaning into ag tech and AI as it is developing. And again, weather will always be a key factor with regard to agricultural related spending. I think we just looked at that with regard to building and construction spending, somewhat similar. So looking at the forecast, wrapping all this up with B&I, lots of variables influencing. Like I said, this is an incredibly diverse group. I was a little surprised to see it down in fourth quarter 23 after so many consecutive quarters of increase. Lowering the forecast just a little bit for the next 2 quarters, very mild growth into the first half of calendar year 24, and then seeing somewhat similar growth patterns to the pools going forward. Again, a lot of this is over 32% of this is related to fulfillment centers and e-commerce. So a lot of that growth pattern somewhat similar to general consumer goods. Again, this is going to vary dramatically for each of you. Your composition of your tax base is very unique as it relates to this tax category. So while these statewide averages, again, represent statewide average, these will not necessarily be your numbers based on your tax base. Shifting gears entirely, let's take a look at restaurants and hotels and a few things affecting this group. The fourth quarter saw growth of just under 1%. I'm going to call it 1%, a little bit lower than the projected 3% that we had anticipated. Why? Perhaps the menu prices are hitting their tipping point. Foot traffic is being reported as lower. The January data point said 79% of operators reported slower foot traffic in their restaurants. We have new legislation that hit reality yesterday. So AB 1228 came into effect on April 1st. Obviously too soon for us to know what's going to happen, but we certainly can derive some thoughts around that. It will impact business operations and the bottom line for operators, the labor pool, pricing, demand. I think we're going to have to wait a little bit to really see what those true impacts are. And then tourism spending, which is the other part of restaurants and hotels, is doing okay. We're starting to see that rebound, a little bit higher than pre-pandemic. And we're also starting to see international business travel rebounding. And we're hoping in 2024 we see those numbers stronger than they've been in the past. Quick look at AB 1228. This is what everyone's talking about. If you're reading the papers, you're seeing all the articles on this, especially in California. Again, this is the $20 per hour minimum wage that is now established as of yesterday for fast food operators. Fast food operators, there are some parameters around what that means. It really is those shared brands, nationally shared brands with over 60 establishments. Those are the businesses that need to comply with the legislation. And really, fast food is immediate consumption where we pay before we eat. There's a very basic definition of fast food or quick service. Couple trends that might come out of this legislation, as you know, we wait and see what those ultimate impacts will be, could be consumers being directed more to apps for ordering. A lot of businesses do this already. We see this a lot in the fast food sector, and less person-to-person contact, more kiosk ordering, kind of getting around the need for more employees due to the higher cost of labor. The forecast, we are expecting to see an increase in menu prices as fast food restaurants, starting in the second quarter of 24, starting yesterday, as they, implement the increased labor cost. We do anticipate consumer sentiment to continue looking for value meals. Folks are looking for a good deal, and we do see that largely in fast food and even in fast casual. Anticipating the forecast to continue to grow and be positive, and a little bit of slower growth in the first quarter, and then we start to gain traction again as we go forward into fiscal year 24-25. Before I wrap it up, just a quick note, fast food is about 30% of the whole restaurant and hotels category. There's a lot of other revenues being pumped into this category, including casual dining, the largest, fine dining, and then of course hotels and leisure and entertainment. So 30% is fast food, and only half of those fast food businesses are going to be required to comply with AB 1228. So kind of putting that into perspective, we're not anticipating a huge nosedive in revenues as a result of the legislation. So with that, I will turn it back over to Bobby to wrap things up.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. So much good information there, and definitely that perspective, right, on restaurants and hotels. As we're hearing about, and maybe some of the a little bit of hyperboil around kind of a new law and how much it's going to change. Consumers just enjoy eating out, maybe don't enjoy cooking food at home quite as much. So yeah, expecting still revenue to be generated, sales tax revenue to be generated. All right. Lots of good information overall from Ken and Tracy. Hopefully that's definitely filled your brain with thoughts and different ideas and what our view of the economy and the spending economy here in California is going to be. As a quick reminder, before I put together the summary, remember in the chat box, if you'd like to put in some questions or those thoughts that we can address here right after the rest of the presentation, be happy to take those. So just keep that in mind. Summary. Here we are. On a fiscal year basis, you can see our new forecast for fiscal year 22-23 or 23-24, that which we're in right now, down overall about 1.1%. This is definitely softer and less overall revenue generated than what we had been anticipating over the last couple of quarters, but the trend is still on par. We did not expect to see dramatic gains. We had been anticipating, now this is for about the entire last year, we saw the softening coming. We've seen, as hopefully we've demonstrated here in the presentation, the entire calendar year has seen decreases over 2022. And so we saw this trend coming. But yes, most certainly we're figuring that the first part of fiscal year, or the first part of the calendar year 24, softer than what we had originally anticipated. As you see in the chat, we did have a question about interest rates and kind of our forecast there. Yeah, the Feds didn't decrease rates here in kind of the spring and early summer period that may have spurred on consumer spending, thereby helping almost save the current fiscal year. As you'll see on the screen here, kind of figuring that that's going to be pushed into fiscal year 24-25. You can see 2% growth there. And then a little bit longer outlook, you can see a return to normal historical growth, something close to 3% would be right in line with the normal trend. I'm always looking for comparisons and perspective. You can see here over to the left, all the way back in 16-17, right around that same, 2.7, 3% growth, kind of quote unquote normal. As we went into 18 and 19, most certainly saw legislative changes, out-of-state online retailers starting to remit. 1920 is the pandemic period. Post-pandemic, dramatic spending by everybody, kind of cooling off last fiscal, most certainly going less this year. So that, again, what we experienced there post-pandemic, not the normal by any stretch. And so this is therefore our longer, more kind of 5-year type outlook. No recession, but as we've talked about throughout, we're going to continue to watch here in 2024, really listening for the feds, see what they will do, how consumers are going to respond. What are overall pricing? What will consumer pricing be on goods and services, and how is that going to impact overall household budgets? We're not entirely hopeful of complete gains, but thinking that we will remain fairly steady overall. With that, before we get into Q&A, just want to kind of highlight in our quarterly meetings this quarter, we're going to be talking about our services through Econ Solutions and the good work that the team there is doing. You'll see a flyer. You can see on the screen here the QR code for their different services. But if you're thinking about kind of shop local campaigns, resident versus non-resident studies are a hot commodity right now that the team's putting together. Or as you'll see in our meetings, our expanding retailers, and also kind of the surplus gap analysis of your local retailers and what you might be missing. Right now, as revenues get constricted, you can imagine, okay, what else can we do? Our Econ Solutions team is helping a lot of agencies try to figure out how to redevelop some, maybe some vacant locations that you have, or just put together some studies and really think more 5 to 10 years down the line during this period where we get a little bit of stagnation overall. With that, Q&A, any questions that you may have, go ahead and, again, as a reminder, put them into the chat. We did have a couple that we decided to address in the chat. I'll kind of reiterate them here for us. But interest rates was obviously, I think for a lot of us, a big topic. What are the feds going to do? When are they going to do it? How are consumers going to respond? By right now, probably pushing a little later in the summer is our expectation. If you've heard me or listened to me over the last few quarters, it's probably going to be pretty close to an election cycle time period to really kind of get the economy spurred. If they wait too long, though, I'm kind of right there on the edge that they could not have the effect that they're hoping to have of decreasing rates. It might just be otherwise expected, anticipated, but not help overall consumers and thereby sales tax generation. So yeah, I think here in 24, interest rates are going to be our big focus. Also, drugstores, and are more drugstores going to be closing? You heard Ken talk about Rite Aid. Yes. As with most businesses, they will evaluate what is best for them and their overall bottom line. A lot of competition. As we all know, you drive by an intersection, you see one on every corner, right? And it's just, wow, okay. Yeah, that might be changing, but it is also an opportunity for those prime locations to be infilled with another retailer. Again, why we'll be providing our expanding retailers document to all of our clients this quarter. It'll be good to maybe inspire some new revenue generation. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the day.